not the line. As a black man, I'm highly threatened by that kind of rhetoric, right? When somebody tells, I don't want anybody telling white people that their entire positive way of life that I also have been enjoying as a byproduct. I don't like how I got here, but I'm happy to stay, right? I do not want somebody going around telling white people that literally everything that they enjoy is is inextricably linked to white nationalism or worse, white supremacy, right? Like, please, I as a relatively well-to-do black man, I'm on bended knee. Please stop telling whites that the only way they will be safe is if I'm gone. Please stop telling them that. I'm begging you. So, like, hey, do you like, going to 7-Eleven at 2 a.m. without needing to work? Well, white nationalism, like, please stop. Please.
Yeah, it's a dangerous game you play because... Yes,
especially for me.
To people decide that they would rather just be the thing that you're calling them and just say, fine, okay, sure. If my option is to be that or to, like, live in a war zone, or something, they're going to... Some point,
even using the word war zone. Listen, if you compare Minneapolis to a war zone, if you don't want your city to be like Minneapolis 24/7, I mean, that's white nationalism in action. Shut up. Absolutely terrible.
I have nothing to say. I'm just here to amplify your voice.
Yeah, just amplify my voice, Dan. So we're going to talk about tearing down statues. This has always been a thing. Yeah, I'm almost a little bit. I kind of want to see how this goes. Because see
how it goes.
This is everybody's chance.
This is everybody's chance.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Okay, you listen. Why are you talking? Okay, you're being a bad ally by talking. Yeah, people have been pushing. The left have been calling to pull down all these statues by the hundreds. I mean, really for since 2012, I would say since the Dylan Roof shooting, I would say. That's when the left was like really in like iconoclasm mode, but it was really hard to, they're ginning up all these outrage mobs and they were like, listen, we got to pull down. That's a statue of a slave owner. That one. I have to admit, they have something of a point. We have a lot of statues of slave owners in this country. Yeah, it's in every country. I know. But still, I didn't even know that Yale, like Eli Yale, was a slave trader until like 2 hours before I recorded this episode.
As the 1619 Project has told us, slavery built America.
Yes.
So if the slaves built America and you want to honor them, obviously you can't just build a statue of people we don't even have records of who they were. So you go, okay, who was in charge of them? We'll build a symbolic statue of that guy.
There's a city in Virginia with a symbolic statue of a black man in a hoodie riding a horse. It's not any particular, but it's an abstract black man, a sort of platonic ideal of a black man in a hoodie, and he's riding a horse, and it's a sort of as a challenge to a Robert E. Lee statue nearby.
Did it look like Will Smith?
No, it looked actually. It kind
of think what the platonic ideal of a black man would look like.
No, actually, it kind of looked like John Boyega. Actually.
That was going to be my next guess.
Yeah.
I'm not even kidding. I was going to say, does it look like Will Smith or more like John Boyega?
But now the left is like, listen, we're not asking anymore. We're just going like a catamar. We're just going to roll down every statue that we see that we don't like.
Miguel Cervantes?
I don't know who that is. Some kind of missionary, I'm guessing. Yeah, they're going after Spanish missionaries. They're going after... Nope, no idea.
You ever heard of Don Quixote?
Oh, okay.
Like one of the most famous.
Yes, I've heard of Don Quixote. Yes.
He was the guy that wrote Don Quixote. He was himself an ex-slave, and he wrote.
It's funny. I've used the phrase "tilting at the windmill of white supremacy." Like, I understand Don Quixote as a thing, but I've never actually read it. Just because I haven't read the book doesn't mean that I can't use idiomatic speech pulled from that book.
Well, it's funny when this happened last, like, what was it, 2 years ago or something, when they were pulling down statues. Trump basically didn't say, if I remember correctly, I don't think he said, oh, these statues are great. I think he said, basically, we don't want to start tearing down statues because it starts here, but eventually it's going to be what? Thomas Jefferson and
Yeah.
George Washington, and I think he basically said, how about we just leave it all be? And the universal answer was like, it is absurd to think that anyone would ever tear down a statue of Thomas Jefferson or George Washington. You know, and it was from all those people who talk like this because they're so smart.
It's the people who do videos on Twitter where they talk really fast at you and their mouth is moving but their eyes aren't.
And now, and so this is like the classic left wing thing that is always done. So it's like, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. That's a straw man.
You deserve it.
And then it's like, you deserve it. It was like how before I was listening to the Fifth Column podcast had a good dispatch recently with Camille Foster, John McWhorter, Thomas Chatterton Williams, and Glenn Lowry. And they were talking about, sort of whatever race issues, these sort of pop culture or whatever you want to call it, this thing that's going on right now, this insane Jacobin movement. They made a point about how before Barack Obama got elected, the common theme among the sort of quote unquote anti-racist people was like, well, Barack Obama, if you asked him, if you asked people, do you think he could become the president? The answer that I think Thomas Chatterton Williams said was that they would give you this sort of knowing, like, no, he just can't be because America's not ready. That's never going to, that's like hundreds of years away. The idea being that a black guy becoming president would be a huge deal that would signal, and that would mean that the United States has moved in a big way from the racist society it once was. So therefore, since we know it is still racist, he can't be president. Up until the minute he was elected. And then it was like, well, this doesn't mean anything. This changes nothing. This has no significance whatsoever. But up until he was elected, it was considered a huge deal. Like, if this guy could become president, it would really prove a lot. But we all know it won't happen because America's racist. And then when he became president, it was like, well, that doesn't mean anything. That's nothing. That's less than nothing. You're an idiot for bringing it up.
Frankly, I'm even offended at how stupid you are for saying.
Well, that's what happens now. Like, that's the game that, like, the conservatives thought they were playing. And then you'll see the only people who say this anymore is, like, Sean Hannity. We'll say, oh, well, we, like, stupidly say, we live in a post-racial society. Barack Obama was president. And the response is an eye roll and a tongue click. And it's like, oh, Sean. You
know, the talking point is dumb when even mainstream conservatives have let it go.
And they do the same thing. It was like, nobody's going to, what are you, insane? No one's going to tear down a statue of George Washington. Oh, wait, we just did? Yeah, because he's a slave owner. He's a piece of shit. What's your complaint? The party line just changes. They just fucking, like, drop shift, and we're all supposed to just deal with it.
I have mixed feelings on statue destruction, though. I am not universally against destroying statues. Here is my view, since I can share it because it's my podcast, sorry, our podcast, which is, if the thing that a statue, not the person, but if the ideal that is being, celebrated by the statue is a thing that is no longer an ideal or never was an ideal, then I think it is valid to try to smash the shit out of that statue. So, for example, at my undergrad, there was a statue of Thomas Jefferson, and it was quite clear to literally anybody with a functioning brain that the reason there was a statue of Thomas Jefferson was to celebrate his commitment to education, secularism, and not civil rights, obviously, but classical liberalism. I'm told people care about these sorts of things, right? Nobody in Nassau County, New York, was like, hey, listen, we're going to put up the statue to Jefferson. And we're just going to celebrate his views on race. We're going to celebrate, this is really a celebration of that time. He really stuck it to Sally Hemings, so to speak. Right? That's what we want to celebrate in the statue. Like, we are racist, and Thomas Jefferson, we want a slave owner, but not like a Confederate slave owner. We want to get a slave owner who, is from the North, so it's plausible deniability. Okay? Nobody thought that. On the other hand, right, I don't know if there are any statues of the guy, but let's say the guy who dropped the bomb in Hiroshima, right? If there's a statue to him, I'm sure, when he wasn't murdering Japanese people by the tens of thousands, I'm sure he was a perfectly nice guy, right? I'm sure I'm sure he lived a life of virtue. I'm sure he was church going. I'm not even going to. I'm sure that guy wasn't even particularly racist. I mean, he might have been. It was the 1940s. But let's say he lived a perfectly inoffensive lifestyle, and in the course of his wartime service, he incinerated tens of thousands of Japanese people. There, you can't deny a statue to that guy. He did nothing else of note, right? There's only one thing that statue is celebrating. That's the atomic bombing of Hiroshima.
Yeah.
And so any statue to that guy, I would absolutely say should be torn down.
Yeah, if there was a statue of like Dostoevsky, the idea that like, oh well, this statue is if someone said, well, we shouldn't glorify gambling addiction. It's like, well, it's clearly not the intent of the statue, because the guy did other things. Yeah. Like he wrote books that, have some merit, whether you can argue that, but it's like the statue isn't of him like rolling the bones. It's him to celebrate him as an author. In the same way that if you wouldn't say of a statue of Martin Luther King, like, do we really want to glorify, cheating on your wife or, plagiarizing your doctoral dissertation or something?
Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
I
instinctively feel uncomfortable when you bring it up, even though I know both of those things are.
Both of the things are true, but it's like everyone knows that the statue of Martin Luther King on the in Washington, D.C. is not about that, and that has nothing to do with why there's a it's not like, wait a minute, this guy cheated on his wife. And if you read his Wikipedia page and you just looked at those two things, you go, why is there a statue of this guy? Well, because of all the other stuff you didn't read that's in his Wikipedia page. That's like way more relevant to why we don't.
There are only two politicians in the United States, two living politicians, that have statues of them already, right? And it's Arnold Schwarzenegger and Bill Clinton. They're the only two politicians that are still alive and have statues. And Bill Clinton has his statue in I think it's in Kosovo, actually. And Arnold Schwarzenegger has one, I think it's in UCLA. It's just one of those.
There's a statue of George W. Bush in Albania.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it's the Bush one in Albania, not the Clinton. Okay, yeah. Sorry, it's George Bush and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, the one of Arnold Schwarzenegger was not
in Kosovo.
Second?
There's also a Clinton statue in Kosovo.
Okay, so there's three. Okay, interesting. The Schwarzenegger statue, if Arnold Schwarzenegger were to...
There's a Jimmy Carter statue at the Georgia State Capitol.
Let's just get to the point. I thank you for correcting me on the show, Dan. Okay. Now, if
there's a Barack Obama statue in South Dakota,
Barack Obama statue should, of course, be destroyed immediately, as should the Bush statue. And Jimmy Carter? Did Jimmy Carter do anything? No.
He invented the peanut, I think.
Please. I'm going to cut out all this. So the Arnold Schwarzenegger statue was built when he was an actor, bodybuilder, all those things, right? The statue of Schwarzenegger is a celebration of the physical form, human potential. If Arnold Schwarzenegger were to, commit like genocide in California somehow, right? He just orders the California State National Guard, and he's like, listen, you're going to run a chevauchée from San Francisco to Sacramento. Just kill everyone you see, a massacre of biblical proportions. The statue that was built of Schwarzenegger does not represent that. And it would be silly after the fact where it's like, hey, listen, I think you should take down that statue of Schwarzenegger. And then someone says like, well, it's a good statue and it represents the ideals we want to uphold. It's like, so you supported the great termination of 2021. Statues celebrate men because of ideals. And if the ideal being celebrated is not an ideal, then destroy the statue. But if the ideal being celebrated is actually an ideal, then we keep the statue. That is my view of how these things should go.
I think that's a fair standard, although there's obviously the question of how do we go about destroying statues?
Right. I mean, this could on the standard, you probably are still going to destroy like the General Lee statues, probably, right? Because you could say the General Lee statue really celebrates, what can we call it? You could say the General Lee statue celebrates loyalty to the state of Virginia above all other considerations. And they say, okay,
yeah,
do we
that's
want to?
putting it in your terms. That's not what the people who make it would say. They would say it celebrates, honor and loyalty in a more
Listen, that's